So from a purely military standpoint, I would say this is the end of the war. So fine, let J.D. Vance say anything he wants, and I don't think anybody's going to pay much attention to it.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor went on Judge Napolitano's podcast to talk about the fact that the war in Ukraine is essentially over on the battlefield and what this means in consideration of Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin within hours of this video being recorded. What does this mean? Is there going to be a peace agreement, a ceasefire to come out of this thing? Are we on the road to peace now? Let's see what he has to say about that. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
What is the state of affairs on the ground, on the battlefield, as we speak, 2 days before the meeting in Alaska between President Trump and President Putin?
Well, as you know, over the weekend, we had the largest strike to this point in the war launched by Russia against Ukrainian targets all over Ukraine. It was devastating. Now what we've seen over the last couple of days are major breakthroughs. And these breakthroughs are occurring largely because there's not much in front of the Russians anymore. So they're smashing their way through defensive lines that are largely unoccupied, not completely, but in many cases unoccupied. And the interesting thing is to watch the Russians because they are nothing if not very, very deliberate and methodical. They move on an axis that is large enough to accommodate thousands of troops, that has good transportation, medical support, evacuation support, logistical supplies. But most important, on either side of the axis where they're moving, they have what I would call ISR dominance, that is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance from basically the smallest drone up to satellites. So they're controlling the area as they move forward. They don't have to be concerned about their flanks or the possibility that somebody may attack through them because all of these ISR systems are linked to artillery systems, rockets, missiles, and so forth. What I'm trying to say is that you have this picture on the one side of Ukrainian forces that are literally bled white, that are falling apart, not for lack of courage or any of that sort of thing. That's nonsense. It's simply impossible for them to mount an effective resistance against the on-rushing Russians.
Yeah, and that's been the case for over a year now. They haven't really made inroads on the Russian front since the summer of 2024, and that was pushed back by the beginning of this year. So yeah, the war is effectively over. Russia has renewed their offensive. You know, a few days back, there was a major strike, and it's important to note, too, that there were massive demonstrations against Zelensky within Ukraine now, with the Ukrainian people really turning against this. And they have been for some time. This has been swept under the rug by the Western mainstream media. But, you know, this is what happens when there's a prolonged period of suppressing dissent, outlawing rival political parties, while the propagandists in the U.S. continue to say, hey, the U.S. is there feeding them supplies and intelligence and military equipment for democracy. That's what we've got here. But yeah, he's right. The war is effectively lost, and there isn't much inroads from the Ukrainian side. Russia has effectively held most of this territory for the entire 3 years with some ebbs and flows in there.
And then on the Russian side, you have this 21st century force, extraordinarily well-equipped, technologically savvy, essentially knocking drones out of the air with either electronic warfare or other means, and moving not at high speed, but fast enough that the opposing force has no chance of recovering. And right now, they keep talking about the so-called Azov formations. I guess there's something like 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 brigades left. I don't know what their strength is. It's probably not much. But these are the sort of diehard Nazis. They seem to be nowhere in the path of the Russians. I think they've beat a path elsewhere.
But those are just those, you know, moderate Nazis that are worth U.S. aid and U.S. dollars to support, right? You know, what's so funny about the Azov regiment, which is a like a literal Nazi regiment incorporated into this military, is that the Western media reported on them in the years prior to 2022. But once 2022 came, you're just supposed to forget about this fact that they're Nazis, and that's where a lot of the U.S. funding is going through. And always has.
So I'm not sure there's really much in front of the advancing Russian forces. So, from a purely military standpoint, I would say this is the end of the war.
Is it fair to say that Russia is close to achieving its military objectives in the war, if those objectives are the acquisition of the 4 oblasts?
Oh well, that's been achieved. But remember, the key thing for them has always been not so much capturing territory, but annihilating the Ukrainian forces on the ground. That's the problem. So they're very force oriented in what they do. Now we may see finally a buildup of forces in various places of 100,000 or more that are large enough and well supplied enough that they can move deeper. I think you're going to see that in the direction of Zaporizhia. The bridges over the Dnieper are intact. Zaporizhia has real strategic value. If they decide to cross the river, they can go north or south from there, attacking north to Kiev or south to Odessa. I think those are the decisions that they're going to make now in the next couple of weeks. And we're going to see more and more movement. But the point is, the Ukrainian force is almost annihilated. There are still some people left. And they're not going to stop as long as there's anyone from these Azov units around.
Yeah, I do agree with them. That's already been accomplished. The possession and holding of the 4 oblasts we're talking about, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. He's talking about Zaporizhia as kind of a corridor to Crimea such that they're linked. But, what's the consideration here more than military possessions and territorial possessions is actually the same demand and same expectation that Putin's always had for this, that Ukraine can't be part of NATO. That's the most important thing. Trump stopped short of saying that. I don't hear Trump saying that. Crimea has to be acknowledged as being part of Russia. I think Trump said that once back in April. I don't think he said that since. And there has to be demilitarization, take out the NATO resources there. There has to be denazification. These are all things that we've known that Putin's always wanted in Ukraine. In fact, he typed it out in the draft treaty that he sent to NATO in, the year, I think it's late 2021, that said, hey, please take a look at these and just put it in writing that Ukraine won't be part of NATO and I won't invade. But the head of NATO, the General Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, basically laughed and said, no, you're going to get war then. So, this was a prerogative about the war, regardless of any territorial acquisitions.
I would expect the Russians to plow forward. But securing the Russian areas, the Russian-speaking areas, yes. But then the next question is, what are you going to do to secure the outcome of the war? They're going to be victorious militarily. That's not enough. In other words, how do you come to an arrangement with somebody who is competent in the West that brings you the measure of security that you want? All of this has been about protecting Russia. This was never about conquering territory and marching west into Poland or Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. That's all nonsense. And I think that's on the back of people's minds right now in Moscow.
Is Donald Trump culpable for war crimes in Gaza?
I think, strictly speaking, yes, our government is culpable. He's at the head of it. Does he really understand that? Does he grasp it? That's a different question entirely. And if you put him in the dock and you started interrogating him and asking him questions, as any good attorney would do, I think people would be shocked at what he doesn't know, because I'm not convinced that he has a fundamental grasp on any of it.
Me too, especially when you surround yourself by people like Marco Rubio and Mike Huckabee and Mike Waltz for a time. And those are the people giving him advice. Keith Kellogg still being in the mix at times. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Who knows exactly the extent to which he knows about the atrocities going on? We can't help to see it on the independent media, but I don't think Trump's exactly watching the independent media. And plus, he's very controlled by the Israel lobby, AIPAC, and their influence. And AIPAC boasts about having 361 congressmen in their pockets. And he accepted $100 million from Miriam Adelson. Certainly financially and bankrolling this thing, he's culpable for war crimes. That doesn't make him, unique compared to other presidents. Of course, Obama and Bush and Clinton were guilty of war crimes too. I mean, technically, there's never been a declared war since World War II. And Congress specifically gives that power to the Constitution specifically gives that power to Congress. So, most presidents are guilty of war crimes. Certainly this is, a result. The world sees what's going on in Gaza. It's not pretty.
And again, from his vantage point, his attitude may be, well, I can't do anything about this. I can't make any decisions that would cross the Israeli lobby and obviously Mr. Netanyahu. So why should I worry a great deal about it? And I think he's actually begun in his own way to try and turn away from things that he can't control. For instance, in Ukraine, one of the things that could happen as a result of this meeting that occurs in Alaska is that he walks out and says, we had a great discussion. We agreed on many things, but clearly we're not ready for an agreement yet. And there's not a great deal that I can do about this situation because my European allies and Mr. Zelensky want something very different. Mr. Putin has done what he can do, but he still wants something very different. And so it's time for me to turn my attentions elsewhere. I mean, that's not impossible. Now, some people will say he can't do that. Well, in reality, the government that he has right now is already on autopilot. In other words, the foreign and defense establishments, they're really on autopilot. We're back to where we were during the first term. It doesn't make a great deal of difference what he may say or do. They're going to do what they're going to do anyway. So he may say, I'm washing my hands of this, but in truth, we're going to continue to do the same old thing. When you get to the Middle East, it's different. That's a much stickier issue for him. He has to be involved in that, and he is. How do you explain his willingness to embrace Jolani, knowing that Jolani is murdering thousands of people on a routine basis? How do you embrace Erdogan, who is a big backer of all of this?
Yeah, Jolani founded the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, but Israel wanted to take out Assad, so that's why he's leading the country. And Trump said, hey, he had a strong past. He sits down with this guy, shakes his hand. That strong past involves being an Al-Qaeda fighter, killing U.S. troops in Iraq, founding the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, and then having arms funneled to him from the CIA in Operation Timber Sycamore through U.S. aid, which provided ISIS and Al-Qaeda with $15 billion worth of arms. And that's where we're sitting there.
How do you embrace the people in Azerbaijan, this Aliyev regime? You know that this thing with Armenia has very little staying power. I don't see anything really good coming out of this. This is all about encircling Russia, splitting Russia from Iran. It's all the same strategy, but he's on that ride. He's strapped in. He's on the roller coaster. He can't get off. That's different. But I think in Eastern Europe, he's probably predisposed to say, look, I've done all I can do. I can't do anything else.
It's interesting you say that, because yesterday it appeared to be an offhanded comment, but it has some legs, as we say in the media today. Vice President Vance said, we're finished funding the Ukrainians. Now, I don't know if it was a comment that he made without thinking about it, if he ran it past the president first, if this is the way they want to set the table for Alaska.
Well, it won't matter if it doesn't come to fruition if we still keep providing aid to Ukraine, despite Vance saying that. I hope he's right, but this whole political campaign and into the Trump presidency has been a whole campaign of rhetoric with no action that differentiates this administration from the Biden administration, the deep state puppet administration, pumping in money to Ukraine. Outside of being willing to talk to the Russians, which, by the way, I'm glad about, there doesn't seem to be not much difference in policy. So I hope I have to eat crow and that J.D. Vance is right, but they haven't proven that. They haven't proven that they've decided to fund this war because the money keeps flowing into Zelensky's coffers.
I don't know. At the present time, we are continuing, as I understand it, you may correct me if I'm wrong, to supply them with the military equipment at the same pace and levels we did under Joe Biden and had been in the past 8 months, and that the Vance statement was an outlier. What do you think?
Well, you say at the same pace. I don't think that's possible because we simply don't have the ammunition, the missiles, the rockets, and so forth, the equipment to send. So I wouldn't say at the same pace. The promises are there. You're still talking about billions of dollars of equipment that people are promising the Ukrainians. And I think there's an increasing awareness that this stuff will never arrive because the Ukrainian government and this Ukrainian state itself will collapse long before that. I mean, that's the reality. That's why I'm saying it may not make any difference to Donald Trump what J.D. Vance says publicly about anything. He may take the view of, well, let's make virtue of necessity instead of allowing people to know that we have failed. He's tried routinely to blame Biden for everything, but he's taken ownership and is very much part of it now. So instead of saying we failed, the war is over and we've lost, we'll just say, well, we're finished with this. We're not going to do that anymore. It's all meaningless. It doesn't matter. None of these people are telling the truth. Everything is for shock and awe, political shock and awe. And remember, the base that's sitting out there that voted for him, they're waiting for evidence that he's going to do any of the things that he said.
Yeah.
And that's the problem for him in foreign and defense policy. He can't. He just doesn't have the maneuver room. So fine, let J.D. Vance say anything he wants. And I don't think anybody's going to pay much attention to it.
Yeah, this has been a verbal campaign of shock and awe, like Macgregor said there, and ultimately it won't matter. I don't see this meeting going well if your hope is to aspire to a ceasefire or a peace to come out of this, because there hasn't been definitive proof that Trump is willing to concede, some of the territory to Russia and have buy-in from Ukraine on that. I mean, Trump doesn't need Ukrainian buy-in. He should just get out of Ukraine and disengage completely. Leave Zelensky high and dry. Let who decides to control the Donbass be up to Russia and Ukraine without U.S. influence. And if the EU wants to step in, let them. Let mayors, put his money where his mouth. Let Macron, let von der Leyen do that if they want to bankroll this thing and take Zelensky on as their pet project, because I want nothing from him anymore. I want nothing to do with him anymore. And this has all been part of U.S. empire building, since the 90s. The beleaguered people of Ukraine are the ones suffering for being the proverbial pawns on a grand chessboard that the U.S. is playing with in regard to this Russia war. And that's what it is. It's a proxy war, but it's a war with Russia. So no, I don't see any tangible good coming from this meeting. I'm glad they're meeting. I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to underplay the significance of just them meeting, but I haven't seen any proof that says Trump is willing to just say no Ukraine and NATO and be the first president to really hammer that fact down. That's not going to happen. I haven't seen Trump be willing to say we are going to demilitarize from Ukraine completely. We won't fund NATO. We won't allow NATO resources in there. I haven't seen Trump say, we're going to recognize the denazification program that Putin wants. These things are the crux of the matter. They've always been. And Trump can keep talking and dancing around this by saying, hey, we're going to sanction them. We're going to impose secondary tariffs if they're not serious about this. But that isn't changing what's happening on the battlefield. So all the tariffs in the world and all the money in the world, we've already dumped in $200 billion into that absurd fiasco, is not changing this. Russia holds the Donbass. And hey, there's rumors that Putin's willing to give away part of Kherson and Zaporizhia to get a peace done. And if that's true, this deal should be taken tomorrow, because that's when he's meeting. At the time of recording this, it's supposed to happen tomorrow. We'll see what happens with that. But, I'm not hopeful, and I'll eat crow if I'm wrong. If this comes away with a peace deal somehow, I'll be shocked, but I'll celebrate it with everyone, because if that is the case, this will be a huge moment for people to celebrate that the U.S. won't be involved in a proxy war versus a nuclear power anymore. Well, will that do that to U.S. and Russian relations? I don't know, but hopefully that would be the beginning steps to normalcy, though I don't see that coming anytime soon, primarily because of the disastrous foreign policy the U.S. has pursued when it comes to Russia in the last few decades. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know down below. Do you agree with Colonel Macgregor? Do you think this meeting with Putin will bear fruit? What do you think will come from this? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Judge Napolitano too. I love this interview. Thank you, Judge. And please consider becoming a member of my channel on YouTube by clicking the join button below. You'll help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all of my members only videos before they go live on YouTube to the general public. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.